Rain hammered against the conference room windows. I stood there, watching droplets race down the glass, while my world crumbled behind me. My badge had already been deactivated. My computer wiped clean while I was still sitting at my desk. 20 people surrounded the long table, but nobody would look at me. Marla Vance, my manager for the past 3 years, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against a folder I recognized, my personnel file. "Scarlett, we've decided to move in a different direction," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. I felt every eye on me, waiting for tears, for anger, for some kind of breakdown they could gossip about later. My fingers trembled as I gathered the few personal items they'd allowed me to keep. A coffee mug my niece had painted. A photo of my late father. Nothing else belonged to me anymore. Then, softly, too softly for the moment, I heard my own voice say the words that would haunt them. "You'll miss me when the lights go out." Security appeared at the door. 2 men I'd worked alongside for years, now tasked with escorting me out like a criminal. They wouldn't meet my eyes either. I walked through that hallway one last time, past cubicles where colleagues suddenly found their screens fascinating, past the break room where someone's laughter died mid-sound. Outside, rain soaked through my jacket within seconds. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building's glowing blue logo. "Keep your light," I whispered. "I'll make my own." My name is Scarlett Cross, and I used to keep this city alive. Most people never knew my name, never saw my face, never understood that the electricity powering their homes, hospitals, and offices stayed on because of me. I'd worked for Sterling City Power for 12 years. Started as a junior engineer fresh out of college, worked my way up through late nights and weekend emergencies. While other engineers came and went, chasing better pay or easier hours, I stayed. This city was my responsibility. The control room became my second home. I knew every transformer, every substation, every weak point in our aging grid. I could hear problems before they happened. A slight change in the hum of equipment, an unusual pattern in power consumption, a weather system moving in that would stress the network. My colleagues started calling it intuition. My supervisors called it luck. But it wasn't either of those things. It was knowledge, experience, and countless hours studying a system that everyone else took for granted. I prevented blackouts they never knew were coming. Fixed problems before they cascaded into disasters. Saved the company millions in emergency repairs and public relations nightmares. But prevention is invisible. Success is silent. Nobody throws parades for disasters that never happen. So while I worked 70-hour weeks keeping the city running, management took the credit, and I remained the invisible engineer in the basement control room. My father used to say, "Scarlett, being good at your job means people forget you exist until something goes wrong." He was an electrician himself, worked 40 years before his heart gave out. I should have listened to him. Should have understood that being indispensable doesn't make you valued, it makes you a target. The nickname started as a joke during my 5th year. I'd predicted a transformer failure in the industrial district 3 days before it happened. When maintenance found exactly what I'd described, exactly where I'd said to look, someone in the break room said, "Cross is like a witch or something, she sees the future." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. It seemed harmless. Then I predicted 2 more failures in the same month. Both came true. The nickname spread, the Witch of Sterling Power. Some people said it with respect, others with suspicion, as if my knowledge was something supernatural rather than earned through years of study and observation. Marla had just been promoted to department head then. She used to praise me in meetings, call me her secret weapon, brag about my accuracy rate to her superiors. But something changed after she took me to that regional conference. I'd given a presentation on predictive maintenance. Nothing fancy, just explaining how pattern recognition and historical data could prevent failures. The response was overwhelming. Other utilities wanted to hire me. Industry publications asked for interviews. Someone mentioned my name for an award. Marla smiled through all of it, but on the drive back, she was quiet. Too quiet. The next week, she used the nickname differently. During a staff meeting, when I warned about stress fractures in the eastern grid, she interrupted me mid-sentence. "Oh, here we go again," she said, rolling her eyes. The witch is casting her little spells, making predictions nobody asked for. The room went silent. A few people laughed uncomfortably. I forced a smile, but something cold settled in my chest. The respect in that nickname had curdled into something else. From then on, every warning I gave was met with that same dismissive tone. Every report I filed was dramatic. Every concern I raised made me difficult to work with. The real trouble started with Project Streamline. Marla called an emergency meeting 6 months before they fired me. She unveiled her big plan, a revolutionary cost-saving initiative that would reduce maintenance schedules, delay equipment upgrades, and cut the monitoring budget by 40%. "We're spending too much on prevention," she announced, clicking through her presentation slides. "Modern equipment is more reliable. We don't need to inspect everything every month like we're living in the 1950s. I sat in the back row, my stomach dropping as I read through the proposal. She wanted to extend maintenance intervals from monthly to quarterly, cut the night monitoring staff, defer transformer replacements for another 3 years. When she asked for questions, I raised my hand. "This is dangerous," I said simply. "Our equipment isn't modern. Some of those transformers are 40 years old. The eastern grid is already showing stress patterns. If we reduce monitoring and something fails, we won't catch it in time." Marla's smile tightened. "Scarlett, I appreciate your concern, but we've had engineers analyze this thoroughly. The risk is acceptable." "What engineers?" I asked, because I haven't seen any structural assessments or failure probability studies. "Has anyone actually looked at—" "I think we've heard enough," Marla cut me off. "Let's not dramatize things. We're all professionals here." After the meeting, I submitted a formal written objection. 8 pages of data, historical failure rates, and specific equipment concerns. I highlighted 12 critical points in the grid that needed immediate attention, not less. Marla sent back a 1-line email, noted, "Moving forward as planned." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the grid in my mind, the weak points glowing red like warning lights nobody else could see. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "When you see danger and nobody listens, you've got 2 choices. Walk away or document everything." I started keeping copies of every report, every warning, every email exchange. I didn't know why yet, just instinct. The rumors started 2 weeks after Project Streamline launched. Subtle at first. A colleague mentioned that Marla had expressed concerns about my attitude. Another said HR had asked about my stress levels. Then came the wellness check-ins. Marla would stop by my desk with a concerned expression, asking how I was handling my workload, whether I needed time off, if everything was okay at home. "You just seem tense lately," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "We want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." In meetings, she'd interrupt my technical explanations with, "Scarlett, you're getting too deep in the weeds again. Let's keep this simple," as if my expertise was somehow a flaw. She praised me in public, always in vague, meaningless ways that made me sound generally competent but not exceptional. In private, during our one-on-one meetings, she'd list all my supposed shortcomings. Too focused on problems, not a team player, resistant to change. "You need to be more positive," she told me once. "People are starting to think you're burned out, that you've lost your passion for the work." I wasn't burned out. I was terrified. Because I could see what was coming, and nobody would listen. The equipment failures started small. A blown fuse here, an overloaded circuit there, nothing major. But I recognized the pattern. The grid was developing stress fractures exactly where I'd predicted. I documented every incident, sent reports, requested emergency maintenance. Each time, Marla thanked me for my diligence and did nothing. Meanwhile, the whispers grew louder. "Scarlett's paranoid. She's seeing problems that aren't there." Maybe the witch thing went to her head. My isolation became complete. Colleagues stopped asking my opinion, stopped inviting me to lunch, treated me like I was fragile, unstable, someone to handle carefully. I'd become a problem that needed managing. The blackout hit on a Saturday afternoon in August. I was home, reading a book on my porch, when my phone started buzzing. Alerts from the monitoring system I still had access to showed the eastern grid collapsing in real time, exactly where I'd warned about stress fractures 3 months earlier. I drove to the office without being asked. Found half the city dark, traffic lights dead, Emergency crews scrambling. In the control room, chaos reigned. Engineers shouted over each other, trying to locate the failure point, while Marla stood in the corner on her phone, her face pale. I didn't wait for permission. I pulled up the grid map, traced the power flow patterns, and identified the failed transformer within 15 minutes. The same one I'd flagged in my report. The same one Marla had decided could wait another year. It's the T47 transformer on Jefferson Street, I announced. The one I wrote up in April. It's completely blown. We need to reroute through the backup lines, and Marla ended her phone call and turned to me, her expression unreadable. Everyone, take 5. Scarlett, my office, now. In her office, she closed the door and crossed her arms. This looks bad, she said. Not thank you for finding the problem. Not you were right. Just this looks bad. I told you it would fail, I said quietly. I gave you the data, and I'm sure you'll make sure everyone knows that. Her eyes narrowed. You understand this makes the whole department look incompetent, right? Makes me look incompetent. I stared at her, understanding dawning. This wasn't about the blackout. This was about her reputation. I'm trying to help, I said. No, Marla replied coldly. You're trying to be right. There's a difference. The review meeting happened 3 days later. They called it a learning opportunity to analyze what went wrong. 20 people packed into the STAT conference room. Department heads, HR representatives, even the director of operations. Marla ran the meeting with careful precision. She displayed charts showing the blackout's impact, the repair costs, the media coverage. Every slide carefully crafted to spread the blame across the entire team. System failures happen, she said solemnly. But what concerns me is our lack of preparedness. We should have seen this coming. My jaw clenched. We did see it coming. I saw it coming. When she opened the floor for discussion, I raised my hand. I submitted a report about that transformer in April. I specifically warned. Scarlett, Marla interrupted smoothly, I think we all appreciate your hindsight. But the question is why the entire team failed to prioritize this issue. Because you cut the maintenance budget, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You extended inspection intervals. You ignored the data. The room went silent. Every eye shifted between Marla and me. Marla's expression remained calm, but I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. I understand you're frustrated, but blaming leadership decisions isn't constructive. The reality is, you had access to the same systems as everyone else. If you saw a critical issue, you should have escalated more effectively. I did escalate. You received 8 separate reports. With all due respect, the director of operations cut in. This sounds like a communication breakdown on both sides. Marla, maybe we need better protocols for urgent concerns. Scarlett, perhaps your delivery needs work. I felt the words like a physical blow. They'd turned my warnings into a personality flaw, my accuracy into a communication problem. However, the director continued, looking directly at me, I have to agree with Marla's assessment. You're a brilliant engineer, Scarlett, but you're not leadership material. You lack the perspective to see the bigger picture. That's when I knew. They weren't here to learn from the failure. They were here to bury it. And I was the burial site. 4 weeks later, Marla called the emergency department meeting, the one that would end everything. I walked into that conference room knowing something was wrong. Security stood near the door, unusual for a staff meeting. HR representatives filled the back row. The director of operations sat beside Marla, his expression carefully neutral. My badge felt heavy on my lanyard. My laptop bag suddenly seemed too full of personal items I hadn't consciously gathered. Marla stood as the room settled into tense silence. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I want to be transparent about a difficult decision we've had to make. My heart started pounding. After careful consideration and multiple conversations with HR, we've decided to let Scarlett Cross go, effective immediately. This is due to ongoing performance inconsistencies and concerns about team dynamics. The words hit me like cold water. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Are you serious?" I sat frozen as Marla continued talking, something about difficult decisions, new directions, supporting my transition. The words blurred together. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat and the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. My badge deactivated with a soft beep that seemed impossibly loud. An HR representative approached with paperwork. Security moved closer to the door. I'd been erased while still sitting in the room. Finally, I found my voice. I stood up, looked directly at Marla, and spoke the words that had been building in my chest for months. "You'll miss me when the lights go out." The room went utterly silent. Marla's practiced smile faltered for just a second. Then she recovered, glancing at security. "Please escort Miss Cross out." As I walked through those cubicles one final time, I noticed the faces. Some showed shock, others sympathy. A few looked relieved, glad it was me and not them. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Nobody asked questions. Outside, in the rain, I realized I was finally free of them. Free to stop protecting people who didn't appreciate it. Free to stop fighting battles I couldn't win. But I also knew something they didn't. That grid was still fragile. Those transformers were still aging. The problems I'd warned about hadn't disappeared just because I had. The city was living on borrowed time, and I was the only one who knew exactly when that time would run out. I sat in my car for 3 hours that first day. Rain drummed on the roof. My phone buzzed with texts from concerned colleagues, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. I just stared at the building through the rain-streaked windshield, watching people come and go, watching the lights glow warm behind every window. My life for 12 years, gone in 15 minutes. Finally, I drove home, called my sister, but no words came out when she answered. She stayed on the line anyway, breathing quietly, letting me sit with the silence until I could speak. "They fired me," I eventually whispered. "I know, honey. I know." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the grid, visualizing the weak points I'd documented, the repairs that weren't being made, the maintenance schedules that had been gutted. 12 years of knowledge sat in my head, useless now. Around 3 in the morning, I opened my laptop. My personal email was full of unread messages I'd ignored during my final exhausting months at Sterling. Job offers from recruiters, conference invitations, industry newsletter subscriptions. One message caught my eye. 3 months old, from a company called Cascade Energy Systems. The subject line read, "Your expertise in grid management." I clicked it open. The recruiter had seen my presentation at that regional conference, the one that had started all my problems with Marla. They were a startup focused on renewable energy integration, building microgrids and sustainable power solutions. They'd tried to poach me twice before. I'd turned them down both times out of loyalty to Sterling. Loyalty. The word tasted bitter now. I started typing a response. Cascade Energy Systems operated out of a converted warehouse downtown. No corporate logo on the building, no fluorescent-lit cubicles, just open workspaces, exposed brick, and whiteboards covered in equations. The founder, Dr. Helena Wu, interviewed me herself. She was 50-something, with silver-streaked hair and calloused hands that marked her as an engineer who still got into the field. "I heard what happened," she said after we'd talked for an hour. "Sterling's loss is someone else's gain. Probably ours, if you're interested." "I'm interested," I said. "But I need you to know I'm angry. Really angry." Helena nodded. "Good. Anger means you still care. Just channel it into something better than revenge." She offered me a position as lead systems engineer. The pay was slightly less than Sterling, but the work was different. Cleaner, ethical, collaborative. Nobody here would ignore my warnings or mock my expertise. I accepted. For the first few weeks, I threw myself into the work. Cascade was developing a distributed grid system, smaller, interconnected power networks that could operate independently or linked together. Renewable sources, battery storage, smart load management, everything Sterling wasn't. But at night, I still dreamed about the control room I'd left behind, the hum of equipment, the glow of monitors, the weight of responsibility for hundreds of thousands of people depending on power they never thought about. I missed the city, my city, the one I'd protected for 12 years. So I started building something new, something that could stand alone when Sterling's aging system finally collapsed. Because I knew it would collapse. It was only a question of when. 2 months after I left, my old colleague Patrick sent me a text. "T52 transformer just blew. Eastern Grid again. You were right. Again." I stared at the message. T52 was on my list. Number 3 out of 12 critical failure points. Another text. "Marla's blaming it on your legacy code. Says you didn't document the system properly." I laughed out loud. My legacy code. as if the physical infrastructure failing was somehow a software problem. More texts trickled in over the following weeks. Former colleagues reaching out quietly, privately, often apologizing. We should have stood up for you. We should have listened. Things are falling apart without you. Each message confirmed what I already knew. Sterling City Power was circling the drain, and nobody there had the expertise to stop it. I didn't respond to most of them. What was there to say? They'd watched me get fired without saying a word. Their guilt didn't fix anything. But I did start tracking the outages. Public data was easy to access. Utility companies had to report major incidents. I created a spreadsheet, logging every failure, every emergency repair, every neighborhood left in the dark. The pattern was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. The grid was deteriorating exactly along the lines I'd predicted. Like watching a building collapse in slow motion, structural failures spreading from stress point to stress point. I documented everything, not for revenge. I told myself that, at least. Just for the record. Just to prove I'd been right. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when Sterling's neglect became undeniable. When their chickens came home to roost. I didn't have to wait long. The first major blackout hit in November, 3 months after my firing. Half the Southern District lost power for 6 hours. Sterling blamed a technical glitch and promised a full investigation. I walked into that meeting room ready to do exactly that. The conference room at City Hall was packed. The mayor sat at the head of the table, flanked by city council members and the city engineer. Sterling's leadership occupied one side, the director of operations, several department heads, and Marla, who sat rigid in her chair, her face carefully neutral. When I walked in with the Cascade team, Marla's expression flickered. Just for a second. Surprise, then anger, then a forced professional mask. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't look away. Helena made the initial presentation, technical overview of our distributed grid system, cost projections, implementation timeline, professional, thorough, impressive. Then she turned to me. Scarlett has intimate knowledge of Sterling's current infrastructure and its critical vulnerabilities. She'll walk you through the specific failure points and our proposed solutions. I watched the press conference from my desk at Cascade. Marla stood beside the director of operations, her expression carefully controlled, reading from prepared statements. Everything is under control. We're implementing additional safeguards. This was an isolated incident. I recognized the location of the failure from the news footage. T19 transformer. Number 7 on my list. I'd written 3 separate reports about it. At Cascade, I pulled Dr. Wu aside. I know Sterling's system intimately. I know exactly what's failing and why. What if we approach the city with a proposal? We could stabilize their grid with our distributed technology. Helena studied me carefully. You think they'd listen? Not yet, I admitted. But eventually, they'll have no choice. This won't be the last failure. It'll get worse. She nodded slowly. Put together a proposal. When they're ready to listen, we'll be prepared. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting a comprehensive plan. A hybrid system that would integrate renewable microgrids into Sterling's existing infrastructure, creating redundancy and resilience. It wouldn't be cheap, but it would work. More importantly, it would expose exactly how badly Sterling had let the system deteriorate. I saved the proposal and waited, because I knew what was coming. The question wasn't if Sterling would fail again, only when and how catastrophic it would be. The second major blackout came 3 weeks later. This time, it hit the hospital district. 8 hospitals lost primary power. Emergency generators kicked in, but 2 hospitals had generator failures, equipment that hadn't been properly maintained. Social media exploded. Patients in ICU units left vulnerable, surgeries postponed. One elderly patient died when her ventilator failed during the power transfer. The city demanded answers. The mayor called an emergency press conference. Media trucks surrounded Sterling's headquarters. Marla tried to control the narrative, but the cracks were showing. During interviews, she looked exhausted, defensive. She blamed aging infrastructure inherited from previous management. She blamed budget constraints. She blamed everything except the decisions she'd made. My phone buzzed constantly. News outlets wanted interviews with former Sterling employees. Patrick texted, "They're panicking. Marla's throwing everyone under the bus. Staff are resigning." Then came the message I'd been half expecting, half dreading. Someone leaked your reports to the press. The ones warning about T19. Your name is trending. I opened social media and there it was. My internal warnings, my predictions, my detailed analyses, all public now. Screenshots of my emails to Marla. Copies of the reports she'd buried. The narrative shifted instantly. This wasn't just infrastructure failure. It was negligence. And I was the whistleblower who'd tried to stop it. I didn't leak those documents. I suspected Patrick or someone else in the department had done it, someone who felt guilty for staying silent. But I wasn't going to deny it either. Sometimes the truth finds its own way out. Sometimes it just needs a little help. The mayor's office called Cascade Energy Systems the next morning. They wanted to meet with Dr. Wu to discuss temporary consulting support for Sterling's grid stabilization. Helena looked at me across her desk. They specifically mentioned your name, said they want your expertise. My hands trembled slightly as I processed this. Going back to Sterling, even as a consultant, felt like walking into enemy territory. But this was also the opportunity we'd been waiting for. Marla will fight this, I said. Marla doesn't have a choice anymore. The city's stepping in, she's not in control. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. City officials, Sterling's leadership, and Cascade's team would all be present. A chance to present our proposal and, if I was honest, to face Marla again with the truth finally exposed. That weekend, I barely slept. I rehearsed presentations, reviewed data, prepared for every question they might ask. But mostly, I thought about what I wanted to say when I saw Marla again. All the anger I'd suppressed during that humiliating firing. All the frustration of being dismissed and mocked. All the vindication of being proven right at such a terrible cost. But when Monday came, I felt surprisingly calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about fixing what was broken. About making sure no more patients died because someone was too proud to admit they'd made mistakes. I dressed carefully in my best suit, professional, confident, unshakable. When the car arrived to take us to City Hall, Helena squeezed my shoulder. "Show them what they lost," she said. I stood, connected my laptop to the projector, and pulled up the first slide. A map of Sterling's grid with 12 points highlighted in red. "These are the critical failure points I identified over the past 2 years," I began, my voice steady. Points where equipment age, load stress, and deferred maintenance created high-probability failure risks. I clicked to the next slide. T47 transformer failed in August. T52 failed in October. T19 failed in November, causing the hospital district blackout. These are points 1, 3, and 7 on my list. Marla shifted in her seat. The director of operations looked pale. I submitted detailed reports about each of these points. Recommendations for immediate maintenance, equipment replacement, or load redistribution. Those reports were not acted upon. The mayor leaned forward. "Miss Cross, are you saying these failures were preventable?" "Yes, sir. Completely preventable with proper maintenance and investment." Marla finally spoke, her voice tight. "With all due respect, Scarlett's reports were considered alongside dozens of other assessments. We had to prioritize based on budget constraints." "I have the emails," I interrupted quietly. I pulled up another slide. Screenshots of my warnings, Marla's dismissive responses, the budget cuts to critical maintenance. The room went silent. "You buried my warnings," I said, looking directly at Marla. "You called them dramatic. You cut the budgets I said were essential, and when your decisions led to failures, you blamed everyone except yourself." Marla's face flushed red. "This is unprofessional. You're clearly biased." "I'm accurate," I said, "and everyone in this room knows it now." The mayor called for a 15-minute recess. Marla left the room quickly, her phone pressed to her ear. The city officials huddled together, speaking in low voices while reviewing the documents I'd presented. Helena found me by the coffee station. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I admitted. My hands were shaking slightly, but from adrenaline, not fear. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. When the meeting reconvened, the mayor's tone had shifted. "The city council has decided to commission an independent audit of Sterling City Power's infrastructure and maintenance records. We need to understand the full scope of the situation before making decisions about the grid's future." Marla's jaw tightened. The director of operations nodded, but he looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. In the meantime, the mayor continued, we're authorizing Cascade Energy Systems to provide temporary consulting support. Miss Cross, you'll have full access to Sterling's systems and records to assess immediate risks. Sterling leadership will cooperate fully. It wasn't everything we'd proposed, but it was a foot in the door. More importantly, it meant I'd be back inside Sterling's systems, able to see exactly how bad things had become. As the meeting adjourned, Marla approached me. We stood facing each other in the emptying conference room. You must be very proud of yourself, she said coldly. I'm not proud that people got hurt, I replied. I'm not proud that a patient died. I warned you this would happen. You chose not to listen. You always were self-righteous. That's why nobody liked working with you. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Maybe, but at least I was right. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. This isn't over, Scarlett. You think you've won, but you've just made an enemy of everyone at Sterling. We'll prove your reports were exaggerated. We'll show you're just a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. I met her gaze steadily. Then I guess we'll let the audit decide. She walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I walked back into Sterling City Power as a consultant, the same building I'd been escorted out of 3 months earlier. Same hallways, same security desk, same coffee smell in the break room. But everything felt different now. The staff who'd watched me get fired now nodded respectfully. Some apologized quietly. Patrick pulled me aside in the hallway, his expression pained. We should have said something, he told me. That day when they fired you, we just sat there. It wouldn't have changed anything, I said, though part of me appreciated hearing it. Maybe not, but it would have been right. I spent the first week diving into Sterling's maintenance records, work orders, and system logs. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Not just the 12 critical points I'd identified, but dozens more that had deteriorated while I was gone. Marla had continued cutting corners after my departure, extended maintenance intervals even further, delayed essential repairs to make quarterly numbers look better. The grid was a disaster waiting to happen. I documented everything methodically, every deferred repair, every inspection skipped, every warning sign ignored. The evidence was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Marla tried to undermine me at every turn. She'd appear at meetings to clarify my findings, suggesting I was exaggerating risks or misinterpreting data. She questioned my methodology, my conclusions, my motives. But I had something she didn't: truth, documentation, and a track record of being right. The city's independent auditors arrived in week 2. They interviewed staff, reviewed records, inspected equipment. One of them, an older engineer named Franklin, sought me out personally. Your reports were thorough, he said. Extraordinarily thorough. It's rare to see this level of detailed analysis. I cared about this system, I replied. About the people depending on it. He nodded slowly. That's obvious. It's also obvious that your warnings were systematically ignored. That's going in our report. The audit results came out 6 weeks after that first City Hall meeting. 140 pages of detailed findings, but the executive summary was damning enough. Critical infrastructure neglect, inadequate maintenance protocols, and failure to address documented safety concerns have created substantial risk to public safety. The report specifically cited my warnings about T47, T52, and T19. It noted that proper action on my recommendations would have prevented all 3 blackouts. It highlighted the budget cuts Marla had implemented, despite technical objections. The press coverage was brutal. Headlines like, "Power Company Ignored Engineers' Warnings," and "Cost-Cutting Decisions Led to Fatal Blackout," dominated local news. Marla's face appeared in every article, often contrasted with screenshots of my original reports. The city council called an emergency session to review Sterling's management. The mayor gave a stern speech about public trust and corporate accountability. Within 24 hours, Sterling's board announced that Marla Vance had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. I watched the announcement on the news from Cascade's office. Helena stood beside me, arms crossed. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," I admitted. "Vindicated, but mostly just tired." That evening, my phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Scarlett. Marla's voice, stripped of its usual confident tone, she sounded exhausted, defeated. We need to talk. I don't think we have anything to say to each other. Please. Just hear me out. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory, public enough to be safe. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back corner booth, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of her usual perfect style. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. Thank you for coming, she said as I slid into the booth. You have 5 minutes. She took a breath. I made mistakes. I see that now. The blackouts, the patient who died, I never wanted any of that to happen. But you caused it to happen. You ignored every warning. I was trying to save money, trying to hit performance targets, trying to prove I was the right person for that position. She looked down at her coffee cup. I saw you as a threat, someone who made me look bad by being too careful, too thorough. Every time you warned about something, it felt like criticism of my leadership. It wasn't about you, I said. It was about keeping the lights on. I know that now. She met my eyes. But I didn't then. My ego got in the way. And people got hurt because of it. I studied her, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another manipulation. But she looked broken in a way I'd never seen before. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, she said. I just wanted you to know that you were right, about everything, and I'm sorry. The apology hung between us. Part of me wanted to throw it back in her face, to remind her of every cruel comment, every dismissal, every humiliation, but I was too exhausted for more anger. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. But it doesn't fix what happened. It doesn't bring that patient back. It doesn't give me back the career you destroyed. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I know, I just needed you to hear it. I stood up to leave, then paused. Marla, you're a good engineer. You used to be anyway, before you let politics and ego take over. Maybe this is a chance to remember that. I walked out without looking back. Her apology didn't heal anything, but it closed a door I needed closed. The anger I'd carried for months felt lighter somehow. Not gone, but no longer burning. The storm hit 3 days later. Weather services had been tracking it for a week. A late-season system, bringing heavy rain, wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, and the threat of flooding. I was at Cascade's office when my old monitoring alerts started going off. I'd never disconnected from Sterling's system when I left, and nobody had thought to revoke that access. Now I watched in real time as the grid began to fail. First, the northern substations showed voltage irregularities. Then transformer temperature spiked across the eastern grid. The system was being pushed beyond its limits, and there was no redundancy to handle the load. I called Patrick. The grid's about to cascade fail. How many engineers do you have in the control room? 3. Scarlett, it's bad. Really bad. We're trying to shed load, but you need to start emergency shutdown protocols on sectors 5 through 9, now, before the whole thing goes down. Marla's suspended. Nobody here has authority to. Then call the director. Call the mayor. But do it now or you'll lose the entire city. I hung up and turned to Helena. Sterling's grid is collapsing. Everything I warned about is happening at once. If they don't act in the next 30 minutes, we're looking at a complete blackout that could last days. Helena didn't hesitate. What do you need? Our mobile generator units. Every battery storage system we have, and a miracle. Cascade Energy Systems had been developing portable microgrids for emergency situations. Exactly this kind of scenario. We'd never deployed them at scale, but we had 6 units ready. Within 20 minutes, we had trucks rolling. Helena coordinated with city emergency services while I directed our teams to critical locations: the hospital district, emergency services headquarters, water treatment facilities. Meanwhile, Sterling's grid continued to fail. Sector after sector went dark. The control room tried emergency protocols, but years of deferred maintenance meant backup systems didn't work. Equipment that should have isolated failures instead propagated them. By nightfall, 70% of the city was without power. Sterling's entire infrastructure had collapsed, exactly as I'd predicted it would. But Cascade's microgrids were online. The hospitals had power. Emergency services could coordinate. Water kept flowing. We'd created islands of light in the darkness. The next 3 days were chaos. Sterling's engineers worked around the clock trying to restore power, but every time they brought a sector online, something else failed. Equipment that hadn't been properly maintained couldn't handle the restart stress. Cascade became the city's lifeline. We deployed more microgrids, coordinated with emergency services, kept critical infrastructure running. News crews filmed our generators providing power to shelters, hospitals, police stations. Helena gave interview after interview, carefully explaining our technology while diplomatically avoiding direct criticism of Sterling. She didn't need to criticize them. The contrast spoke for itself. On day 3, the mayor held a press conference. She stood in front of one of our generator units, hospital lights glowing behind her, and announced that the city would be entering a partnership with Cascade Energy Systems to rebuild the power infrastructure. "What we've seen this week is unacceptable," she said. "Sterling City Power's neglect has endangered our citizens. Going forward, this city needs a reliable, resilient power system. Cascade has proven they can deliver that." I watched from our command center, surrounded by tired engineers and empty coffee cups. Patrick texted me, "You did it. You actually did it." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted and sad. This disaster could have been prevented. All those people sitting in the dark, all those businesses losing revenue, all that fear and disruption, none of it had to happen. When Sterling's grid finally came back online 5 days after the storm, only 30% of the city still relied on it. The rest had switched to Cascade's temporary microgrids and refused to switch back. Sterling City Power, the company I dedicated 12 years of my life to, was effectively finished. The board of directors held an emergency meeting 1 week after the storm. By evening, the announcement came. Sterling City Power was filing for bankruptcy. The company would be dissolved, its assets sold, its contracts terminated. Marla Vance's suspension became a permanent separation. The director of operations resigned. Half the management team was let go. The engineers, people like Patrick, who'd actually kept the lights on, were offered positions with the city's new utility management structure. Sterling's headquarters building, the one with the glowing blue logo I'd stared at through the rain, went dark. For sale signs appeared. The company that had defined the city's power infrastructure for 50 years ceased to exist within 6 months of firing me. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a strange kind of grief. Sterling had been my home for 12 years. Flawed, frustrating, but mine. Watching it die felt like watching part of my own history disappear. Helena found me standing outside our office one evening, staring at the city lights spread out below. "You okay?" she asked. "I didn't want this," I said. "I just wanted them to listen, to do the right thing." "I know, but they didn't, and here we are. You saved this city, Scarlett. You saw what was coming, and you prepared for it. That's not revenge, that's responsibility." Maybe she was right. Maybe the difference between revenge and justice was just a matter of intent. I hadn't sabotaged Sterling. I'd simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. The city council announced a new public-private partnership. Cascade would lead the infrastructure rebuild, incorporating renewable energy, distributed systems, and the kind of preventive maintenance I'd always advocated for. They offered me the position of Chief Infrastructure Officer. I accepted, but with one condition. Patrick and the other Sterling engineers who'd stayed loyal to the work got senior positions on the new team. They'd been caught in the middle of management's failures. They deserved a second chance. 6 months after the storm, we held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first sector of the new grid. Solar panels gleamed on rooftops. Battery storage units hummed quietly in converted substations. Smart meters communicated with a central system designed to catch problems before they became disasters. The mayor gave a speech thanking Cascade, thanking me specifically, praising the innovative spirit that would power our city into the future. When my turn came to speak, I stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. City officials, business leaders, reporters, and scattered throughout, former Sterling employees, including Patrick, who gave me a subtle nod. "I used to think being indispensable was power," I began. "That if I made myself essential, if I knew more than anyone else, if I worked harder and longer, I'd be valued, I'd be protected." I paused, gathering my thoughts. But that's not how it works. Being indispensable doesn't make you valued. It makes you a target. People resent what they depend on. They fear what they don't understand. The crowd was silent, attentive. Real power isn't making yourself indispensable. It's building systems that work without you. It's creating resilience instead of dependency. It's being willing to walk away and watch the lights come back on anyway, maybe even brighter than before. I looked directly at the spot where I knew television cameras were recording. To everyone who's ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told their expertise doesn't matter, document everything. Trust your knowledge, and remember that sometimes the best thing you can do is stop protecting people from the consequences of not listening to you. The applause was genuine. Afterward, people approached with stories of their own, times they'd been ignored, dismissed, proven right too late. Each story echoed mine in different ways. Patrick pulled me aside as the crowd dispersed. That was quite a speech. Just the truth. Marla was watching, he said. I saw her in the back. She left before it ended. I felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction exactly, but closure. She'd seen what could have been if she'd just listened, if she'd valued competence over ego. That was enough. 1 year after being fired, I sat in my new office on the top floor of Cascade's expanded headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, my city, its lights steady and bright even as evening fell. The new grid was 90% complete. Blackouts had dropped to nearly zero. Our distributed system meant that when failures did occur, they stayed isolated, contained. No more cascading disasters. Sterling City Power existed only as a cautionary tale now, a business school case study in what happens when management ignores expertise and prioritizes short-term gains over long-term stability. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your success. You earned it, MV. Marla. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Helena knocked on my doorframe. Got a minute? Always. She handed me a magazine, Power Industry Today, with a cover story titled The Engineer Who Rebuilt a City. My face on the cover, standing in front of our new solar array. How does it feel to be famous? She asked, grinning. Strange. I spent 12 years being invisible. Now everyone wants interviews. That's because you have a story people need to hear, especially women in technical fields. You prove that being right matters, that expertise eventually wins. I thought about that. Not always. Plenty of people are right and get crushed anyway. True, but you didn't get crushed. You got strategic. You documented. You prepared. You didn't just wait for vindication. You built an alternative. That's what makes your story powerful. She left me with the magazine. I read the article slowly. It was mostly accurate, though it glossed over how much anger and hurt I'd carried for months. How many nights I'd cried from frustration. How close I'd come to giving up on the industry entirely. The article painted me as confident and calculating, as if I'd known all along how things would turn out. But the truth was messier. I'd been terrified, uncertain, convinced I was throwing away my career and my reputation. I'd just been too stubborn to stop anyway. That evening, I drove to my father's grave. I hadn't visited in months, too consumed with work and the weight of transformation. But tonight felt right. I sat on the grass beside his headstone, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. I finally understand what you meant, I said aloud. About being good at your job making you invisible until something goes wrong. About having to choose between walking away and documenting everything. The wind rustled through nearby trees. I did both. I walked away, but I took my documentation with me. Built something better. Something that couldn't be buried or ignored. I thought about his 40 years as an electrician. All those houses wired, all those problems solved, all that knowledge shared. He'd never been famous, never been recognized beyond his immediate community. But he'd been respected by people who understood the work. They called me a witch because I could see what they couldn't, I continued. Because pattern recognition and expertise looked like magic to people who didn't want to learn. But you taught me that the real magic is just showing up, doing the work, and refusing to compromise on safety. I stood, brushing grass from my jeans. I think you'd be proud. Not of the revenge or the vindication, you never cared about that stuff, but of the fact that this city's power system is finally being built right, that people are safe. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at the city lights spread out below. Every bulb, every streetlight, every glowing window represented someone's work, someone's expertise, someone's commitment to keeping civilization running. I was part of that now, in a way I'd never been before. Not invisible, not overlooked, just finally, properly valued for what I'd always been capable of. 6 months later, I stood before a room full of engineering students at the State University. Guest lecture series. Helena had volunteered me, and I couldn't refuse. Most of you will spend your careers being underestimated, I told them. Especially the women in this room. You'll be talked over in meetings. Your ideas will be attributed to others. Your warnings will be dismissed as dramatic. They nodded, already familiar with the story. And you'll face a choice. You can make yourself smaller, quieter, more palatable, or you can document everything, trust your expertise, and be prepared to walk away. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. But what if walking away means letting people get hurt? Like, if you know something bad will happen. That's the hardest part, I admitted. You can't protect people who won't be protected. You can warn them, document your warnings, and make sure that when failure comes, and it will come, the truth is on record. But ultimately, you're not responsible for other people's choices to ignore you. Another student asked, "Did you know it would work out? When you left Sterling, did you know you'd end up here?" I smiled. Not at all. I thought I was ending my career. I was terrified and angry and convinced I'd never work in this industry again. But I also knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for people who didn't value the sacrifice. I looked around the room at their young, earnest faces. They called me a witch because my knowledge made them uncomfortable, because I could see problems they wanted to ignore. But the truth doesn't burn. It glows. And when you stop dimming yourself for others, when you stop making yourself small to make them comfortable, you stop needing their light. The lecture ended with applause. Afterward, several students approached with questions, with their own stories of being dismissed or overlooked. I listened, advised, and shared contact information. Driving home that night, I thought about the journey from that rainy day when security escorted me out to this moment of mentoring the next generation. How much had changed. How much I'd changed. My phone rang. "Helena, how'd the lecture go?" "Good. Really good, actually." "Excellent, because the mayor wants to expand our grid model to 3 neighboring cities. You interested in leading the project?" I smiled, watching the city lights in my rearview mirror. Steady, bright, safe. "Yeah," I said. "I'm interested. Because that's what real power looks like. Not revenge, not vindication, just the quiet certainty that you built something better, and the freedom to keep building." They'd fired the witch. And in doing so, they'd set her free to show the whole city what light really looks like when it's built on truth, expertise, and refusing to compromise on what matters. The lights would never go out again. Not on my watch.